To discuss that a bit further, we're joined by Mr. Webster Griffin Tarpley, author and historian, who's joining us now from Washington. Mr. Tarpley, thank you very much for joining us. Now, a number of big players will not be attending this Friends of Syria meeting. Taking that into account, will it accomplish anything at all?
Well, of course, it's very notable that Russia, China, and indeed Lebanon, a country that's immediately involved with Syria, will be boycotting this meeting. The meeting bills itself as the Friends of Syria. And all I can say is, with friends like that, you don't need enemies. The purpose of the conference is to bring the wonderful benefits of NATO bombing and a civil war on the Libyan model to Syria. My calculation is, if NATO does to Syria what it did to Libya last summer, that would mean between 500,000 and 1 million dead Syrians, and of course civil war, chaos, warlords, and so forth. The solution to Syria is very simple. Tell NATO to call off their death squads. Tell NATO to stop smuggling foreign fighters and weapons and explosives into the country. Now, the conference itself in Tunisia, it'll be held not far from the ruins of Carthage, which maybe should serve as a memento mori to some of these imperialists. What's notable about the conference is that Syria will not be represented. So imagine a conference about Syria where Syria is not even invited. Even, or equally absurd, the Syrian opposition, so-called, is also not invited. The NATO people have not been able to come up with a group of serious-looking, presentable puppets. So the Syrian National Council, the Free Syrian Army, the group around Qaddam, all of these people, they're not invited. They're being kept in the closet, right? The reason officially given is that they're fragmented, they squabble, they can't agree. So notice, it's obviously a regime change conference, but there's no alternative. So they're saying, let's have regime change with no alternative government, now, and they even admit that. I think the deeper level, of course, is that the Syrian opposition is shot through with al-Qaeda operatives. If they had a delegation, who knows who the head of the delegation might be? It might be Abdel Hakim Belhaj, the fighter from Libya, who has been reported to be leading some of these death squads, at least in the northern part of Syria. The Tunisians, in setting this up, have reverted, unfortunately, to their role as obedient puppet of the West. And the Tunisian foreign minister, with, I think, an amazing arrogance, has said, the Syrians can choose between Libya and Yemen. In other words, either you can be bombed and destroyed as a country, or you can have this fake transition where you then end up with an election with only one person. So on the whole, it looks like Hillary Clinton, who is the main architect of this exercise, I think there's a good chance she'll end up with a lot of egg on her face, because this thing looks to me like it might be headed to be a fiasco. There's supposedly 70 people, 70 countries coming. Maybe it'll be a whole lot fewer.
Mr. Tarpley, as you mentioned, those out to topple Assad have tried various ways to get the international community behind their plot, but they've only gotten a non-binding UN resolution so far. Does that, in a sense, indicate failure on their part, and will that remain the status quo?
I think it does indicate failure. We may, to coin a phrase, be in the last throes of imperialism. What is being attempted here is an ultimatum. The plans that are circulating on the eve of this Tunisian exercise are that the countries, this ad hoc group, coalition of the willing, I guess we could call it, of rump states, or rump coalition at least, they come together and they say, okay, Assad, you have 72 hours to do what we want. We want humanitarian corridors. We want the Syrian army out of the cities so that our death squads can take over with al-Qaeda leading the pack. And if you don't cave in within 72 hours, then we will impose more sanctions. Now, I don't know who's going to follow those sanctions. I think they've already reached the limit with that, because these, of course, would be unilateral sanctions. They would not even be UN sanctions. So it seems to me that the international climate is changing. And one other thing on a related topic that I would point to is the Brazilian foreign minister, Patriota, has called on Ban Ki-moon to say, look, Ban Ki-moon, you have a responsibility to say that all of these options that we hear on the table, as, for example, in regard to Iran, some of those violate the Charter. And you, Ban Ki-moon, have got to say these are illegal. So stop playing the role of a good NATO puppet and start acting like the Secretary General of the United Nations. I think that's another straw in the wind for a change of the international climate.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for now. That was Mr. Webster Griffin Tarpley, author and historian, joining us from Washington. Mr. Tarpley, as always, we appreciate your insight here at PressTV.